The words reached him in a tone so careful it felt rehearsed, the way people speak when they know they are about to detonate someone's life. The young man behind the front desk said that his wife had checked into the hotel the afternoon before, accompanied by another man. For a moment, the statement hovered in the air between disbelief and insult. He almost laughed, not because it was amusing, but because the idea was too absurd to process. His wife was supposed to be at home with their children, managing school schedules and dinner routines while he endured another tedious business trip. Yet the security staff insisted there was no mistake. The footage showed her face clearly, the same face he kissed goodbye 3 mornings earlier. The more they spoke, the more the world he trusted began to fracture into something unfamiliar. By the time he left the office, clutching copies of the footage and registration records, he felt neither rage nor hysteria, only a cold clarity forming beneath his ribs. It wasn't revenge that stirred inside him, not the cinematic kind fueled by shouting and shattered glass. It was something quieter and far more devastating, consequences set in motion by truth. His name was Marcus Delaney, 44 years old, and until that week he believed his life was orderly, predictable, and earned through years of steady discipline. He had built a career in brand strategy at a respected firm in Milwaukee, cultivated a reputation for reliability, and built a family life that looked, from the outside, like the model of stability. In the span of one phone call, that structure began collapsing with a soundless, methodical precision. Marcus had always measured success in tangible markers: contracts signed, promotions earned, and the quiet pride of clients who trusted his judgment. His colleagues described him as methodical, a man who listened more than he spoke and delivered results without theatrics. He had married Elise, his university sweetheart, nearly 16 years earlier, and together they raised 2 children who filled their suburban home with noise and motion. Their daughter Leela possessed the impatient confidence of early adolescence, already critiquing the world with a maturity that both impressed and worried him, while their younger son Theo lived in a universe populated by fossils, reptiles, and imaginary expeditions through prehistoric jungles. Their house sat along a quiet street bordered by maple trees, with a modest yard and a golden-coated retriever that greeted everyone like a long-lost friend. To Marcus, the life they built represented not perfection but continuity, routines repeated, holidays remembered, and a sense of belonging reinforced by years of shared memory. He traveled frequently for work, yet he believed the foundation at home remained immovable. That belief sustained him through airport lounges, delayed flights, and hotel rooms that all smelled faintly of detergent and anonymity. When he left for Toledo earlier that week to finalize a campaign proposal for an indecisive manufacturing client, he carried nothing heavier than a laptop bag and the expectation that he would return to the same life waiting intact. The hotel itself was unremarkable, a downtown business property designed for efficiency rather than comfort. His room overlooked a grid of streets washed in sodium orange light, and the coffee tasted faintly metallic, as though filtered through the pipes of the building itself. He had spent the morning refining presentation slides and rehearsing talking points when the call came through the room phone rather than his mobile. Expecting a housekeeping inquiry or billing question, he answered distractedly, barely glancing away from the screen. Instead, the hesitant voice introduced itself as the assistant manager and asked him to come downstairs regarding a situation. The pause before the word lingered long enough to stir unease. When the young man finally explained that a guest matching his wife's identification had checked in the previous afternoon accompanied by a man, Marcus felt the first tremor of unreality ripple through his thoughts. He responded automatically, stating the impossibility of the claim. Elise was in Wisconsin with the children, he said, his tone steady, almost bored. Yet the silence that followed carried an unmistakable weight, and the young man insisted he come to the lobby. Marcus remained seated for several seconds after the call ended, the receiver still in his hand, aware of a subtle numbness spreading through his fingers. Outside the window, Traffic moved with indifferent rhythm, the city continuing its ordinary routines while his mind strained against an explanation that refused to assemble itself into logic. The walk to the elevator felt longer than it was, each step echoing against carpeted floors that seemed suddenly unfamiliar. He tried to occupy his mind with rational possibilities, an administrative error, a stolen identity, a coincidence involving someone with the same name. Each explanation dissolved before it could settle. By the time the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, he had composed his expression into professional neutrality, the same calm mask he wore in tense negotiations. The assistant manager stood near the front desk, posture stiff, sympathy flickering across his face. He guided Marcus into a small office where the general manager waited, an older man with silver at his temples and the deliberate manner of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information. After brief introductions, the manager rotated a monitor toward him and pressed play. Grainy footage showed the lobby entrance, guests moving through the frame in grayscale monotony. Then Elise appeared, unmistakable in her posture and stride, wearing the charcoal coat he had given her 2 winters earlier. She was smiling. Beside her walked a tall man in a tailored suit, his hand resting casually against the small of her back. Marcus watched them approach the desk, watched her sign the registration, watched the clerk hand them 2 key cards. The footage shifted angles to the elevator bank. She leaned into the man, and he kissed the crown of her head with easy familiarity before the doors closed around them. Marcus felt the dryness spread across his throat as though he had swallowed dust. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen, precise and indifferent. When the video froze, the manager spoke softly, asking whether Marcus recognized the man. He did not. The name attached to the reservation, however, landed with heavier force. Victor Hale, a regional executive at the pharmaceutical company where Elise worked as marketing director. The revelation rearranged fragments of memory into a pattern he had been too trusting to see. Late meetings, sudden travel obligations, guarded phone calls taken in another room. The assistant manager displayed the billing record showing the room charged to a corporate card linked to their household account. Marcus felt the last remnants of denial dissolve. He did not raise his voice or demand explanations. Instead, he requested copies of every document and recording, his tone measured and precise. The manager hesitated only long enough to caution him against confrontation before agreeing. Marcus provided a private email address and waited while the files transferred. As he stood to leave, he felt a peculiar steadiness settle over him, a clarity that replaced shock with purpose. He was not interested in scenes or accusations. Information would matter more than outrage. Facts would outlast emotion. The manager asked what he intended to do with the material. Marcus replied that he intended to protect his children and himself. The older man nodded, understanding more than the words expressed. Back in his room, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint hum of the ventilation system while forwarding files to secure storage. He opened a blank document and began constructing a timeline. Dates, locations, financial transactions, names. The act of documenting steadied his breathing, transforming chaos into sequence. His phone vibrated with a message from Elise asking how the trip was going and reminding him that Theo needed help studying for a science quiz. The casual warmth of the text felt surreal in light of what he had seen. He did not reply. Instead, a new question emerged, one that eclipsed even the betrayal. If Elise was in Toledo the previous afternoon, where were the children? He called his mother-in-law, who answered cheerfully and mentioned that Elise had told her about a leadership retreat involving families. The explanation felt rehearsed, corporate language masking vagueness. After ending the call, Marcus checked school attendance records and learned both children had been absent for 2 days, excused by a note referencing an educational event. Their devices were offline. The realization settled over him with suffocating weight. His children were somewhere unknown, removed from routine without his knowledge. This was no impulsive decision. It was planning, coordination, a deliberate concealment executed while he presented slides in a conference room hundreds of miles away. He contacted a private investigator named Ronan Pike, a man he had hired years earlier during a corporate dispute. Ronan arrived within hours, carrying the composed intensity of someone accustomed to uncomfortable truths. Marcus presented the footage, the fabricated retreat story, the school absence records, and the unanswered calls. Ronan listened without interruption, then summarized the situation with blunt efficiency. This was orchestration, not coincidence. They traced the last known movements of the children to a college student who occasionally babysat. She revealed she had transferred the children to a man in a dark SUV at a roadside service station, believing it was arranged by Elise. The man identified himself as working for Victor Hale. Surveillance footage from the station provided a license plate. Within hours, Ronan traced the vehicle to an employee within Hale's department and uncovered property records linking Hale to a secluded lakeside cabin outside Madison. Each discovery tightened the knot in Marcus's chest while sharpening his focus. He was no longer reacting, he was assembling. That evening, Marcus initiated a video call to Leela's phone. Her face appeared against an unfamiliar backdrop, pale walls, lamplight, and a window revealing darkness beyond. She spoke carefully, as though aware that her words mattered. Theo appeared briefly, excitedly describing a frog he had caught, unaware of the tension beneath the conversation. He mentioned a man named Victor bringing pizza the previous night. Leela's expression hardened at the mention. Marcus ended the call with reassurances, then sat in silence, absorbing the confirmation that his children were at the lakeside property Ronan had identified. He drafted an email to the pharmaceutical company's chief operations officer outlining evidence of misconduct involving Victor Hale and misuse of corporate resources. He attached documentation with clinical precision. When he pressed send, he did so without flourish, understanding that truth delivered to the right place would carry its own momentum. The drive north unfolded beneath a sky the color of burnished steel, headlights cutting through darkness as Marcus rehearsed what he would say and what he would not. He would not shout. He would not threaten. He would document and remove his children from a situation they had never chosen. The cabin appeared exactly as the photographs suggested, a two-story structure nestled among trees, its windows glowing warmly against the night. A dark SUV rested in the driveway. Marcus parked along the road, recorded the scene, and contacted the county sheriff's non-emergency line to report a custodial concern. When the deputy arrived, Marcus presented identification and documentation establishing parentage and the circumstances under which the children had been removed. The deputy approached the door while Marcus waited beside the patrol car, the night air sharp in his lungs. Moments later, the door opened and Leela emerged behind the man from the gas station. She saw Marcus and ran toward him, her composure dissolving into relief. Theo followed, confused but smiling. Marcus knelt and held them both, feeling their small arms wrap around him with an urgency that erased miles and hours. He secured them in the car while the deputy clarified that the children appeared safe and were free to leave with their father. As Marcus pulled away from the cabin, Leela stared out the window, her voice quiet as she admitted that the trip had never felt like a vacation and that her mother had cried when she thought they were asleep. Marcus reached across the console and squeezed her hand, promising they were going home. His phone rang repeatedly before he answered on speaker. Elise's voice was tight with panic, accusing him of taking the children. He corrected her calmly. He had retrieved them. He advised her to check her work email. Then he ended the call. The road unwound ahead of them, headlights tracing a path back toward a life that would never again resemble what it had been, yet might still be rebuilt into something honest, something steadier, something grounded not in illusion but in truth revealed. Marcus returned home well past midnight, guiding the car through familiar streets that now felt subtly altered, as if the geometry of his life had shifted while he was away. Theo fell asleep before they crossed the county line, his head tilted against the seatbelt. Clutching a plastic dinosaur he insisted on bringing everywhere. Leela stayed awake, watching the dark ribbon of highway unspool ahead of them. her silence heavy with thoughts she was too young to carry. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light glowed against the siding, illuminating the same front steps Marcus had climbed thousands of times. Inside, the house smelled faintly of detergent and cedar, a domestic stillness that felt almost ceremonial. He carried Theo to bed without waking him, then lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching the steady rhythm of his son's breathing. Leela hovered near the hallway, unsure whether to retreat to her room or remain close. Marcus knelt and assured her she was safe, that nothing else would change that night. Only after both children were settled did he sit alone at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. His phone vibrated relentlessly on the counter, Elise's name flashing again and again, but he turned the device face down and let the calls dissolve into silence. For the first time in 2 days, he allowed exhaustion to seep into his muscles, though sleep remained distant, replaced by the sober awareness that recovery had begun, but resolution still lay ahead. By morning, the digital consequences of the previous evening's email had already begun unfolding. Marcus found 3 voicemails from numbers he recognized as corporate extensions, and 2 messages from attorneys requesting confirmation of receipt for documents he had provided. The pharmaceutical company had opened an internal investigation, citing potential violations of executive conduct policy and misuse of company resources. Marcus read each message carefully, responding only to acknowledge receipt and to reiterate his willingness to cooperate if necessary. He moved through the morning routine with deliberate calm, preparing breakfast, signing a school absence form to excuse the children's missed days, and reassuring Theo that everything was normal while carefully avoiding explanations that would burden him with adult failures. Leela watched him with perceptive eyes, absorbing tone and gesture more than words. When the school counselor called to offer support, Marcus accepted, recognizing that professional guidance might help Leela process the fracture she had witnessed. Throughout the day, he resisted the impulse to check social media or mutual acquaintances for rumors, understanding that speculation would only cloud the clarity he needed. He focused instead on immediate tasks, stabilizing the children's routine, documenting communications, and contacting an attorney recommended by a colleague. Each action felt less like retaliation and more like reconstruction, the careful framing of a new structure where the old one had collapsed. 3 days later, Marcus sat in a conference room with muted gray walls and a polished table that reflected the overhead lights in sterile precision. His attorney, a composed woman named Helena Ortiz, arranged documents in careful stacks while Elise sat across from him beside her own counsel. She looked diminished, the confidence he once admired replaced by fatigue etched beneath her eyes. She did not meet his gaze. Helena spoke with measured clarity, outlining custody arrangements, designed to prioritize stability for the children, primary residence with Marcus, structured visitation for Elise, and provisions ensuring that neither parent would discuss the circumstances publicly in ways that could harm Leela and Theo. Elise's attorney attempted a brief objection before Elise placed a trembling hand on his arm and asked for a pen. The scratch of ink across paper sounded louder than it should have, a finality contained in each signature. Marcus felt no triumph, only the gravity of irreversible choices. When the meeting ended, Helena remarked that the swift agreement suggested Elise understood the legal exposure she faced. Marcus nodded. Both she and Victor Hale had been terminated pending investigation results, and Victor's spouse had filed for divorce within days of the disclosure. The consequences were not orchestrated by Marcus's anger, but by the factual record each decision had generated. In the weeks that followed, Marcus discovered that relief did not arrive as a sudden release, but as a gradual loosening of tension he had carried without noticing. The children resumed their routines, early alarms, backpacks by the door, hurried breakfasts, and the familiar scramble of weekday mornings. Theo spoke frequently about returning to the lake to catch frogs, unaware of the context that made the memory painful. Leela attended counseling sessions and began journaling at her therapist's suggestion, filling notebooks with observations about trust, change, and resilience. Marcus attended one session at the counselor's request and listened as Leela explained that she had sensed something was wrong long before the trip, but had not known how to voice it. Her words pierced him with equal parts sorrow and pride. He reassured her that none of what happened was her burden to carry. At home, he rearranged schedules and responsibilities, discovering a competence in domestic rhythms he had previously taken for granted. Laundry cycles, grocery lists, and meal planning became acts of steadiness rather than chores, each repetition reinforcing a sense of security the children could rely upon. The legal proceedings finalized quietly, absent the spectacle Marcus once associated with courtroom drama. Financial accounts were divided according to state law, the house refinanced to allow Marcus to remain, and visitation schedules established with careful specificity. Elise moved into a modest apartment across town and began part-time work for a medical supply distributor, a position far removed from her previous executive role. Marcus did not inquire into her circumstances beyond what affected the children. When she arrived for supervised visits at her mother's home, she greeted the children with visible restraint, as though afraid any sudden movement might fracture the fragile access she retained. Leela maintained a guarded politeness, while Theo embraced her with uncomplicated affection. Marcus observed these interactions from a distance, understanding that the children's relationship with their mother would evolve independently of his own feelings. He neither obstructed nor encouraged beyond what stability required. The boundary he maintained was not punitive, it was protective, preserving emotional space where healing might eventually take root. Work resumed its steady cadence, presentations replacing crisis management, deadlines supplanting legal consultations. Marcus found unexpected solace in professional routine, the familiar structure offering a counterweight to personal upheaval. Colleagues expressed support with understated tact, avoiding intrusive questions while offering flexibility when he needed to adjust his schedule. He noticed that his patience had deepened, that he listened more attentively during meetings, and responded with a calm authority sharpened by recent experience. Outside the office, he prioritized evenings at home, attending school events and weekend practices with a consistency he once believed travel made impossible. Leela joined the junior varsity soccer squad and discovered a fierce satisfaction in competition, while Theo's fascination with prehistoric life evolved into elaborate cardboard dioramas spread across the dining room table. The house, once quiet during his frequent trips, filled with the rhythms of shared presence. Music drifting from Leela's room, Theo narrating imaginary expeditions, and the steady percussion of paws against the floor as the dog followed everyone from room to room. Autumn arrived with crisp air and the scent of leaves, bringing with it the first sense of genuine forward motion. At a Saturday match, Marcus stood along the sideline as Leela sprinted across the field, her ponytail cutting through the sunlight like a banner of determination. She scored the winning goal in the final minutes, then searched the bleachers until she found him, her expression breaking into a grin that carried relief as much as triumph. Theo sat beside Marcus, flipping through a book about Jurassic reptiles, occasionally glancing up to ask whether velociraptors hunted in packs. As parents folded chairs and gathered equipment, a woman approached Marcus to compliment Leela's performance. Her name was Nadia Fournier, a chemistry teacher with a daughter on the team, and their conversation began with sports logistics before drifting toward school schedules and the peculiar exhaustion of single parenthood. Her laughter was unguarded, free of the performative charm Marcus had once mistaken for warmth. They exchanged brief smiles and practical remarks before parting, yet the encounter lingered with a gentle, unforced ease. Over the next several weeks, Marcus and Nadia crossed paths repeatedly at practices and school functions, their conversations lengthening in increments so natural they seemed unplanned. They discussed homework struggles, cafeteria menus, and the subtle art of persuading adolescents to complete chores. Eventually, they met for coffee after a game, discovering shared appreciation for quiet routines and the fragile humor required to navigate unexpected life turns. Marcus found himself speaking candidly about resilience rather than recounting betrayal, framing his recent past as a lesson in attention rather than grievance. Nadia listened without judgment, offering neither pity nor platitudes. When they later took their children to a science exhibition downtown, Thea raced from display to display, while Leela and Nadia's daughter debated robotics exhibits with spirited intensity. Marcus observed the scene with a cautious optimism, aware that healing did not require forgetting, but did demand openness to new connections formed without pretense. Winter approached with early darkness and the soft hush of snowfall, drawing the household inward toward evenings of shared meals and quiet conversation. Leela's laughter returned in spontaneous bursts, often triggered by Theo's dramatic reenactments of dinosaur battles. Marcus instituted Friday movie nights, allowing each child to choose in rotation, resulting in an eclectic sequence ranging from animated adventures to nature documentaries. On alternate weekends, Elise visited under agreed supervision, and though the interactions remained tentative, Marcus noticed a gradual easing in Leela's posture and a renewed brightness in Theo's greetings. Healing, he realized, did not occur in declarations but in small repetitions of presence and reliability. The past could not be revised, yet the future unfolded daily through choices that favored steadiness over resentment. He no longer monitored Elise's life beyond what affected the children, and thoughts of Victor Hale receded into irrelevance, his absence a testament to the self-executing nature of consequence. Nearly a year after the night in Toledo, Marcus sat on the back porch with a mug of coffee warming his hands, listening to the muffled sounds of the children moving through their morning routines inside. Frost traced delicate patterns along the railing, dissolving as the first light spread across the yard. He reflected not on the collapse that had once defined his days, but on the architecture rebuilt in its aftermath. Trust reestablished through consistency, routines restored through intention, and relationships strengthened by honesty rather than assumption. His phone chimed with a message from Ronan Pike suggesting lunch the following week, and Marcus replied with gratitude, recognizing that unexpected alliances sometimes emerged from shared adversity. Inside, Theo called out triumphantly about locating his missing dinosaur figurine, and Leela reminded him they would miss the bus if he did not hurry. Marcus stood, set his empty mug by the door, and stepped back into the warmth of the house. Life no longer resembled the one he had lost, yet it possessed a clarity and solidity he had never before appreciated. In that quiet recognition, he understood that what endured was not the illusion of perfection, but the deliberate, daily practice of showing up for the people who remained.